Hey guys, this is part 2 of our Cokeville bombing episode. So if you haven't listened to part 1 yet, get on it and then come back.
It had now been 2.5 hours since David had taken over the school. As teachers tried to keep the students as quiet as possible, David grew more and more agitated. This is the Miracle Files. I'm Emily Jones.
And I'm Holly Worthington. We're two sisters who love a captivating true story, but we're also seeking more light in our lives.
So we're on a mission to find and share unforgettable, uplifting stories of God's miracles. We hope you'll join us on this journey. Welcome back to the Miracle Files. We know you're dying to find out how this story ends, so we're just going to jump right into this one.
So here's a quick recap of our last episode.
David and Doris Young believed in reincarnation, and that once they passed the other side, they would create a brave new world, and would need followers for this new world. So David devised a heinous and twisted scheme. Out in the Arizona desert, David used his prototype bomb to demolish an old school bus. He was now ready to use this deadly mixture to demolish an elementary school.
And I remember Doris Young standing there, and that sense of something was wrong, I just started feeling it.
I remember all the guns on the wall.
In his hands, it looked like an explosive device.
And he had sent a letter to the government for all this money.
And so he told the teachers basically that he would execute a child if they went over the square.
Outside the school, a frantic community erupted in chaos. The police tried to calm the enraged crowd. A militia charging in on a madman tied to a dead man's switch was a recipe for disaster.
Okay, now that you're caught up, here's the Cokeville bombing part 2.
Deputy Rich Haskell was sitting on the bleachers, enjoying a high school basketball game in Rock Springs, Wyoming, when he received a call from dispatch. They told him there was some kind of incident happening in Cokeville, and they needed his assistance right away. 2 individuals had taken Cokeville Elementary hostage with a bomb. Though Rich was 130 miles away, he was the closest certified bomb expert in this area. There was no time to spare. Rich ran to his car and drove as fast as he could toward Cokeville, exceeding 100 miles per hour. At the same time, the police in Cokeville struggled to restrain the crowd, explaining to the frantic parents that David Young was strapped to an explosive with a dead man's switch. Shooting him would trigger the bomb, endangering everyone inside the school. The police tried to calm the crowd. Despite their anxiety and fear, there was nothing the police could do but stand down. Inside the school, 5th grader Amy and 2nd grader Nanette stood in the crowded classroom, crammed together with their classmates. David and Doris Young still sat in the middle of an imaginary square where the children weren't allowed to tread. Even with the windows now open, the strong smell of gasoline hung in the air. As teachers tried to keep the students as quiet as possible, David grew more and more agitated, and Doris complained of a migraine. Little Nanette's older cousin saw Nanette playing on the floor and came to her side to comfort her.
My cousin, who was in 6th grade, he came up to me and he just said, "Nanette, we're going to be okay because Jesus is with us." And in my mind, feeling that as strong as I could be, that, yeah, of course he is, right? The next thing I remember really is walking around the square. I went to another corner. My teacher was there. I went and sat with her, and she was just asking me how I was doing. And I just remember being like, my cousin came up to me, and he told me that Jesus is with us. I'm good.
Many of the older children who could fully comprehend the danger they were in were much more terrified than Nanette. Amy wished to help in any way she could and carried a water-filled mayonnaise jar to the kids around her, offering them a drink. So far, she had filled up the mayonnaise jar twice with water. Meanwhile, David Young's frustration was mounting. It had now been 2.5 hours since David had taken over the school. Sweat dripped off his forehead. As a diabetic, he began to feel ill. He finally tied the hair trigger bomb to Doris and left the room to go into the little hallway bathroom. Less than an hour away, Rich Haskell, the bomb expert, continued to speed down the road. He'd been going so fast that he blew out the engine in his car. While he waited for the nearby police to bring him another car, every second felt like an eternity. He desperately wanted to reach Cokeville before the bomb went off and killed everyone within its vicinity. When the new car arrived, he immediately jumped in and took off again. In Cokeville, even though the elementary school children tried to be still, they were children who wanted to interact and play. Their energy was overwhelming to Doris, who sat tied to the bomb, waiting for David to return. She wanted the children to settle down. She waved her hands at them. One of the teachers asked her a question, and she shrugged. Again, she complained of a headache, and she motioned with her arms 1 too many times. Her movement was just enough to pull that tiny piece of wood from between the clothespin. Nanette was still explaining to her teacher that Jesus was there with them, and Amy passed around the mayonnaise jar when...
And I remember as I was handing the jar to Mikey, and right as he put his hands on the jar, the explosion happened. There was just no time to prepare. It was just instant. And immediately, the blast was so powerful that I was knocked over this little desk with Mikey, and there was all these little kids in that same area. And I remember just being upside down with my legs up against the wall in a pile with all these little children. And it was just that second of, wow, it's happened. The bomb went off, and realizing that I was actually alive, and I could hear immediate screaming, just lots of screaming. And the room was pitch black. It was so dark.
Like, it was just black and red. Those are the two colors I remember. Like, if you had just a curtain of black and red put in front of your face, you couldn't see through it. It was just really, really dark.
Flames soared up into the ceiling, and the classroom filled with the sounds of screaming. Little Nanette stood up, not knowing where to go. But then miraculously, it was as if an unseen force was guiding her through the classroom.
And I remember looking over there, and I could see the window. And I remember thinking, you just can't get out that way. Then I looked all the way across to the door, but I could see it like a straight path. And I was like, that's your way out. And so I just ran to the door, and looking back, I didn't hit anything. Like, there were piles of desks. There were, kids, like, shells are going off everywhere, and like firecrackers. All the bullets were exploding off the car. I just ran to the door, and I got out of the room. And then again, I looked left, which is right where the outside door is. It's right there. And I remember looking and thinking, oh, that's really like smoky and foggy. And there were people, and I just thought, nope. And so I turned right again. And it was just as clear as day to me.
Amy experienced a much more difficult exit.
It was so dark. There was so much smoke that had filled the room, and you couldn't see. You really could not see anything. And as I untangled myself with this group of children, I could hear in the background over and over, all the teachers. They were all repeating over and over again to the children, get down and out, get down and out. Don't push, don't push. Find your nearest exit and get out of the room. The nearest exit to me was the door that was coming in from the west side of the room, from the main hallway. And I made my way toward that door. There was quite a few of us that were trying to get through the door. I don't remember being pushed down or against anything. I just remember we were all just carefully trying to get out as fast as we could. I made it out into the hallway, and that's when I noticed for the first time this strange tickling sensation on my ear. And this all happened within a matter of, probably only 30 seconds. Once I get into the hallway, I realized that funny tickling sensation that was on my ear and my neck, on the side of my face, that it was actual flames. I stopped and paused long enough to look down and see that there was flames coming off of my right shoulder. And I realized at that moment that I was on fire. And I remembered immediately what Mr. Moore had told us a week before. What do you do if your clothing's on fire? And I remembered, you drop and you roll. And I did. I dropped straight to the floor as hard as I could, and I started rolling. And I noticed as I was rolling, I didn't feel a relief. The tickling had moved from just like this funny flicking sensation to pain. I could feel a real hard, heavy pain was coming. It was burning. I could feel burning. And I knew that my skin was burning. And I was rolling as fast as I could, but it was not going away. And what I find out later is that there was two parts of the bomb, and the top part of the bomb was gasoline jugs, and the bottom was black powder. And there had been leaking, a hole somehow in these jugs. It had leaked gasoline down the side of the jug and dripped into the black powder and sort of made a wet sort of clay type texture. And when the bomb exploded, that clay kind of flung and hit students, and I was one of those kids that got hit with it. And so it was sort of a thick, oily spot on my clothing, and as I was rolling, it was spreading it. It wasn't actually making the fire go out, it was spreading it. And then within a few seconds of me trying to roll, I immediately felt hands grab me around my ankles, and another set of hands grabbed around my knees, and they dragged me across the carpet a few feet, and they just start hitting me so hard. All over, these hands are slapping the fire out of my clothing. And someone grabs me around my shoulders and picks me straight up and puts me on my feet and says, "Run, Amy, run." And that's what I did. I was pushed toward the north part of the building, so I had to run all the way back down that younger classroom hallway, passing the front desk and going out those two double doors to the front part of the building.
Inside the blackened classroom, bullets and shrapnel continued exploding everywhere, filling the wall with pockmarks. As the bomb had detonated, Doris Young was immediately engulfed in flames. She screamed in agony until David came out of the bathroom, saw her pathetic state, and shot her dead. As one of the teachers tried to escape out the window, David shot him in the back. Then David turned the gun on himself. His reign of terror was over. Outside the school, anxious parents, emergency workers, and news reporters lined the streets, desperate for answers and hoping for a miracle. Policemen surrounded the building.
And I remember making it out of the building and seeing some students there, and we were so surprised that it had happened. And I turned myself around, and I remember looking at the door and not seeing anyone else behind me and thinking, where is everyone? Not understanding why more students hadn't come out.
Rich Haskell was still driving at breakneck speed when he heard the devastating news over the radio. The bomb had gone off. Rich's heart sank. He was too late. With his extensive experience with bombs, Rich knew what they did to human bodies. He was certain he was now heading to a scene of destruction where he would find nearly 160 people dead. In Cokeville, Amy tried to run home, but an EMT intervened, guiding her into an ambulance. Other students and teachers escaped out the opposite side of the school. When Rich Haskell reached the scene of the explosion, he was stunned by what he found. Later, he said in an interview,
"Well, When I arrived at Cokeville, of course, they had the roads all blocked off, and there was not a lot of people around the school at the time. When I arrived, I could see out on the lawn, there was a black object laying out on the grass. As I got closer to it, I could tell it was a body, and of course, you just start thinking about what took place. I really did not even want to walk inside that building because I was just afraid that I'd see kids all over the place. But when I walked up to the window and looked inside the window and didn't hardly see anything out of the ordinary except it was all black inside. The windows had been knocked out and had been blown out. I was later told that everybody had been taken to different hospitals, ambulance services from all over. When I walked inside of the classroom, it was a kindergarten classroom, which meant that the desks were smaller. Everything was smaller because of the smaller children. I walked into the bathroom and there was the suspect that had started this whole mess, laying there on the floor he had a pistol in his hand and you could tell he had shot himself in the head. What had happened, I can't explain it. I cannot tell you what happened. The tuna fish cans, if you can imagine, here's 2 tuna fish cans sitting here like this, and a gallon jug of gasoline sitting above it. These are designed to just spread out the particles all over the air. The gasoline bottle was leaking. It had a small pinhole leak in it, and it dripped into both containers, and they both became a paste. This can, the aluminum powder, never went out. The wire was cut. I know there's angels. I know that for a fact. When you say, what cut that wire? I don't know. I can't explain it. The kids couldn't have done it. The detonation didn't do it. It was cut. There was 3 of us there. We had people from ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. There was another bomb technician that came up from Evanston. He was studying to be a bomb technician. And we all looked at that and said, that wire's been cut. Just like with a pair of pliers, pair of snips, it was cut.
Something unexplainable had happened in Cokeville. In preparation for this day of terror, David Young had meticulously designed a bomb powerful enough to demolish the entire school. He had tested it to perfection. It should have killed every single person in that school. Instead, miraculously, the bomb had malfunctioned and exploded upward. The gasoline leak had drenched David's powder mixture, preventing the air from catching on fire. The wire that had been cut was for a blasting cap that failed to trigger. And though bullets had fired all around the room, they had shot just above the children's heads. While many of the children, including Amy, had experienced serious burns, the only 2 lives lost that day were David and Doris Young. The body lying out on the schoolyard was Doris's body. Even the teacher who had been shot survived. Over the next weeks, something even more miraculous began to unfold that no one could explain.
In the days right after, a lot of the little children kept talking about people in white. And so some of the parents that were hearing this from their little kids were calling other parents that had kids the same age and saying, hey, my little one's saying this, have you? And so all of a sudden you have all these parents all saying, yes, we're all getting the same feedback. So they decided to have a town hall, which was closed to the public, and the parents came and had a discussion about what was going on in their families, what they were witnessing. And they were sharing a lot of these stories.
So for me, the miracle part for an 8-year-old was the fact that I could see my way out, that I had such calm, but I also just knew what to do. Like, I could process through the whole thing, and so you're being helped. There were ones who had angels help them out. So just so many miracles, so much help to get everybody out of that room that day. And to me, I walked out without a scratch. So I was in a bombing, but we were able to just walk out without any problems.
Many people who experienced the bombing that day felt they had to find guidance. Part of Amy's miracle wasn't realized until years later in 2015. Amy was doing a presentation along with a man named T.C. Christensen, who was directing a film about the Cokeville bombing. Amy was asked by a participant if she'd ever found out who had helped her get the fire out of her clothing.
And I responded, oh, that was Mr. Moore. My 5th grade teacher did that for me. And then we moved on. Well, after the presentation, TC came up to me and he said, hey, Amy, I need to talk to you about something. And I said, okay. And he says, so kiddo, tell me about the fire getting slapped from your clothing. And it was Mr. Moore. And so I just told him, I said, yeah, I remember it was Mr. Moore's voice. I remember him telling me, run, Amy, run. And he said, really? And I said, yeah, why? And he's like, well, because it wasn't Mr. Moore. He's like, but let me tell you something. I've read every journal. I interviewed every person over and over again. So, years and years of research. And I said, yeah, 7, you said. He's like, yep, years of research. And I can tell you beyond the shadow of a doubt that Mr. Moore, Rocky Moore, did not leave that window.
Mr. Moore had saved many lives that day by helping children escape from an open window.
And I said, okay, well, then it was before he got to the window. It was in the beginning then. And he said, no, Amy, he was across the room when the bomb exploded. He was by the window and he stayed at the window the entire time. And I said, okay, all right. So then in my mind's eye, I guess as a child, I just assumed it was Mr. Moore's voice, but okay, it had to have been Mr. Mitchell or Mr. Exel or Mr. Miller. And TC said, no, there were no men in that part of the room. They all went out the south door. Nobody was at that north door. There were no teachers assisting children out of the room from that north door where you entered the hallway. And I said, impossible. That's impossible, TC. Somebody was there. Somebody helped me. And he said, is it impossible? And I kind of stopped and he kind of, smirked at me. And I said, wait a minute. I said, TC, are you telling me what I think you're telling me? And he said, I am in fact telling you that I do not think that any physical person helped you that day.
Amy confirmed with the other teachers that indeed none of them had helped her put out the fire. Amy, Nanette, and all of the children and staff at Cokeville Elementary had experienced a miracle that day, back in 1986. It is one they will never forget.
I always can look back at the faith of a child because I just look back at how believing I was. I didn't even question. I didn't say, well, I don't see how that's going to work out. Or I just knew. And I think, the faith of a child to just trust is crazy. I also believe that just knowing he was that close, like knowing that, yeah, he will come save us was pretty big, that Jesus is there, that he loves us. Yeah, miracles remind us that we're not alone, remind us that God loves us. They remind us that Jesus wants to help us and will when he can.
Miracles happen every single day, every day, in such a great magnitude like the one that I've experienced, but also small little miracles every day. And the more that we recognize these miracles, the more that we understand where they come from, the more we actually will be given. And I have been given just so many more than this experience. And if we had hours and hours, I would share with you all of the amazing miracles that I have had in my life since then. But the miracle for me that day was that I came to the knowledge that God was there. He heard our prayer, that I healed completely from my burns without a trace, complete healing, and that I could have the courage and the strength to overcome this situation, and that I could have a loving and fulfilled life, that I wasn't defined by what happened to me that day. In reality, I was refined by it.
We cannot know why some children are spared and others aren't. Someday, we believe God will make all of that clear to us. Nanette has a theory about why the children of Cokeville were spared that day.
For me personally, when I think about the Cokeville miracle, I think it kind of had to be a saving situation. I just kind of think it was all of Cokeville. Like, if it killed all those kids, Cokeville would have been done. You take every child from first grade to sixth grade and even half your kindergartners. Like, what do you have left for all those years as they go through the school system? There's nobody, right? Like, you don't need the teachers. You don't have athletics. Like, I just feel like it would have folded up the town to have that go off, right? It saved Cokeville by saving us in that miracle.
Things could have gone very differently in Cokeville, but instead, Cokeville stands as a testament that miracles happen. And no matter how dark the moment, God can comfort and help us through it. He never leaves us alone.
This story was so powerful to me. I mean,
Crazy.
David Young was an absolute psycho.
I would say he is just pure evil.
Yeah,
Crazy.
I would agree.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, we purposely left out all the details of the bomb since we wouldn't want to be responsible for telling maybe the wrong person how to build such a terrible bomb. But
Don't do
suffice it
that.
to say, yeah, don't do that. But suffice it to say, this thing was meant to annihilate everyone in the school. And
Yeah.
just the way things turned out, unbelievable. Like, only with God was this
Right.
possible.
Well, if this bomb had gone off as he had intended, this would have been the most deadly school attack in U.S. history.
Yeah, it would have. And the only two people who died were the assailants. Like, what are the chances of that?
Well, we know it's not just chance. This was a miracle. In fact, in Wyoming State History's website, they actually have a quote that says, "Many people recalled praying silently, forming prayer circles, and seeing angels during the crisis." That's on their Wyoming History webpage.
Yeah. And I definitely believe there were angels there that day. And this story has had a lasting effect on so many people. In fact, it changed Rich Haskell himself, the bomb expert. He was not a religious man before this.
Yeah, he didn't even
And-
believe in God at all.
Yeah, he didn't. He'd been in the military and he'd seen the worst of humanity, worst of human cruelty to one another, and it had affected his faith in God. But after witnessing the way the bomb malfunctioned and witnessing evidence himself of angels being there, his faith in God was restored.
Yeah, and I think it's so cool to have the opinion of an expert because sometimes people might, was it a miracle? They might doubt. But when you have the opinion of an expert who looks at the bomb, it's just, it makes it more concrete. And I think that's a little blessing and miracle for all of those involved to know God was there. God was looking out for them. And also, we had hoped to interview Rich Haskell.
Yeah.
We'd been communicating with his son, who was helping us set up an interview with Rich. And then sadly, this past July, just before we were supposed to have our interview, Rich Haskell passed away.
Yeah, we were so sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it was very sad and disappointing. But we actually were able to speak with his son, Jason Haskell. And we found out from him that Rich Haskell was a hero in his own right. And in fact, Jason Haskell, Rich's son, was actually the person who we had read the quotes from Rich's interview that he had given years ago.
Yeah, it was so cool that his son was able to read his father's words. He said it meant a lot to him.
Yeah.
And we would love to share some of Jason's interview. We asked Jason what he'd heard his father say about the bomb, and this is what he said.
He said, I don't know how many times, that bomb defied physics. It did nothing that it should have done and everything that it shouldn't have. And in that, I explained that the way it was designed was to blow out. When it finally went off, it went straight up into the roof instead of going out into the room the way it was intended. Sorry. The accounts of the witnesses seeing people standing around it to push it on. The people standing along the walls to protect the children. He said none of that made sense in the physical world. But in the spiritual world, it made perfect sense.
Wow.
Isn't that how miracles often are? Like, they don't make sense in the physical world.
Yeah, they
And
don't
yet-
make logical sense always.
No, I love that. I love how he said that and how emotional he
Yeah.
was.
Yeah. We asked Jason if there was anything that he wanted to share about his father, and we have to share this. It's amazing what he said.
There's a lot I'd want to say. I don't know if I can. It's hard to talk about him. It's just, he was always my hero growing up. I didn't realize how much of a hero he was to so many other people. Literally. And I saw it when we had his funeral. Person after person, just dozens of people came up and said, "Your dad saved my life because he did this. Your dad saved my life because he cared, because he helped me do this. He pointed me in this direction instead of that, and it changed my life, and now here I am." And, we had some of the folks from the incident in Cokeville at his funeral, and they were telling the stories. He really was a real life, modern day hero. And it wasn't because of, instances like this are incredible, and they're definitely, faith promoting, but it's just a compilation of all the things that he did every day. He lived with service in mind and always looking to serve other people. And I know there's a lot of other people out there that do similar things that don't get the recognition. It's like, if we just stop and look, we can see the heroes and we can see the miracles around us that are happening every day. And I'm grateful that I got to live with one.
Yes, we agree, Jason, that miracles happen all the time and there are heroes everywhere.
Yes, heroes and miracles all around us if we just have eyes to see. So we'd like to dedicate this episode in memory of Rich Haskell.
Absolutely. And thank you, Jason, for sharing a bit of his life with us. Thank you, Amy and Nanette, for being willing to share your stories with us as well. As we were researching this story, we found that there are many people, many victims of this incident that felt it was so traumatic that they weren't able to talk about it, which makes us...
It was hard on the whole community.
Absolutely. And it makes us even more grateful that you were able to share your story with us. We're grateful for your courage and for the light that you have been able to share.
Thank you for joining us. If you have a miracle to share, contact us at themiraclefiles.com or find us on Facebook.
We're now releasing multiple episodes each month, so subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and YouTube for amazing video content as well.
Join us next time as we discover more of God's miracles. And don't forget to look for His light in your own lives.